It is midnight here on the East Coast. Our breaking news: the federal government now officially partially shut down. Congress was unable to reach an agreement with President Trump to temporarily fund the government, the president insisting that any deal would have to include $5 billion for a border wall. Here's what he said in the Oval Office last week.
Okay, you want to put that on my...
You said it.
I'll take it.
Okay, good.
You know what I'll say? Yes. If we don't get what we want, one way or the other, whether it's through you, through a military, through anything you want to call, I will shut down the government.
Okay,
absolutely.
fair enough.
And
We
I am
disagree.
proud, and I'll
We
tell you what,
disagree.
I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck. I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it.
He got his wish. The government, as of this moment, now partially shut down days before Christmas. Both the House and the Senate adjourned late Friday night, but will return on Saturday. I want to go right to CNN's Brian Stelter, Phil Mattingly, Caitlin Collins, and Elena Plott. Hello to all of you, I should say, excuse me. That sound that you hear, which is crickets in Washington, Phil, that's the government now shut down for the third time this year. How long are we expecting this one to go on?
I don't think anybody has the answer to that question. It's funny, Don, I was talking to a Republican official who's been a veteran of all of these over the course of not just this year, but the last couple of years, and he made what I thought was a rather salient point. Both parties have managed to bumble their way into shutdowns over the course of the last couple of years, but the reality is there's no elegant way out. There's no way that every party involved can claim a win, and the reality of the matter is somebody is essentially going to be bludgeoned and have to cry mercy. I think the big question right now going into this, and as we now are in a partial shutdown at this moment, is anybody willing to cry mercy? Most notably, is the president willing to blink? When you look at the dynamics as they've sat for really the last couple of weeks, the president wants $5 billion for his border wall. Negotiations tonight said that they were willing to come down a little bit from that. Democrats have made clear they're not budging off what their offers have been for the last number of days. And if nobody is willing to blink, then there is no resolution in the near future. Now, Don, you know as well as anybody, if Congress wants to make something work and the president is willing to sign, things can often come together rather quickly. Right. The problem right now, when you talk to both Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill, is they believe one key ingredient of that equation does not exist: the president's willingness to sign anything less than what he's looking for. And therein lies the possibility that this isn't just an hours-long shutdown or a couple days-long shutdown, but one that might actually last weeks at a time.
Caitlin, did you get special dispensation to stay on the White House lawn? Because you're still, usually by 10:15, we're like, we got to get her off the lawn. The curfew is
just for you, Don.
So 10 days ago, Caitlin, President Trump told Democratic leaders that he'd proudly own this shutdown. Now he's blaming Democrats. Do we know what he would sign to reopen the government?
No, and no one will go as far as to say what exactly that is, and that's the frustration of many Senate Republicans, even those who visited the White House earlier today. Such a last-minute meeting that some of them couldn't even get through Secret Service when they first arrived. That has been the million-dollar question here. What is the president going to support? Because earlier this week, we started out with House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell believing the president was going to sign that short-term spending bill, and they were feeling pretty confident about it, with Mitch McConnell telling reporters there was not going to be a shutdown. Of course, here we are at midnight, and we are now in a partial government shutdown. Now, so far tonight, the president sent his Vice President Mike Pence, his incoming Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, and even his senior advisor and son-in-law Jared Kushner up to Capitol Hill for about 5 hours today, where Phil and everyone is chasing them around. And of course, they're working on these negotiations, talking about what they want, saying they want more than $1.6 billion for the border wall, but not going as far to say as they need $5 billion. But of course, they can negotiate all they want, and it all comes down to whether or not the president is going to support something, and that is what House Republicans will be watching over the next few days.
Brian, are we here because conservative hosts revolted, got under Trump's skin?
That's a big factor. Right-wing radio and TV hosts combined with the Freedom Caucus pressuring the president to fulfill a campaign promise. That campaign promise, of course, was rooted in misinformation. That promise that there had to be a wall because there's this invasion coming from the South. All of that's rooted in a lot of misinformation. But the president believed it, he promoted it, and here we are 2 years into his presidency, the third shutdown in less than a year. This is how the GOP is going to end 8 years of control of the House and Senate. You know, they control both chambers right now. This is how they're going to end it, by shutting the government down. It's a sad day, and I think no matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, or you don't care about politics, the country deserves better than this.
Yeah.
Federal employees screwed over Christmas.
Yeah. Elena, was it a mistake for President Trump to say $5 billion for the wall, given the votes don't exist in the Senate? Did he play this wrong?
You know what, Don? I think one point that keeps coming back to me over and over, especially today as I've spoken to sources on the Hill and in the White House, is that Donald Trump had two opportunities earlier this year to accept a deal for $25 billion for funding for his border wall over the course of several years in exchange for a pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients. That is something that Republican leaders and Trump, turned their backs to both times. And Republicans on the Hill and especially in the Senate will tell you today that it was likely a big mistake on their part to not take this deal. And what I'm hearing, especially from people on the Trump campaign right now, is that coupled with just the larger idea that Trump will very likely not get the $5.7 billion he wants for this border wall. This puts him in a huge predicament ahead of 2020. How does he explain this to a base that is already, as Brian notes, unraveling in terms of their support for him?
But I'm wondering, do you think that deal, will, the one that they had, do you think that'll still be on the table once Democrats take over the House?
No, absolutely not. As Dick Durbin put it, I think to Bloomberg earlier today, that deal is off the table entirely. And Pelosi will say this to reporters as well. They don't trust the president anymore when it comes to negotiations over DACA. He's shown twice that while he's willing to signal that he wants to enter into good faith talks about ensuring a pathway to citizenship, he ultimately doesn't follow through. So they're not going to start down that road again.
Interesting. Phil Mattingly, what are your Republican sources telling you about the president and his shifting positions? Do they feel like they have any guidance here?
No, they don't. I think Caitlin hit on this, and it really underscores what's happened over the course, or what's transpired over the course of the last 3 days. Again, Senate Republicans had a deal. They passed something unanimously with Democratic support to fund the government through February 8th, with the understanding that they would continue this fight then when House Democrats took over the majority. And they were completely undercut. They wouldn't have made that deal, and they would not have put it on the Senate floor and voted on it if they did not think the president was going to support it in the end. That was their implicit, and I'm told explicit, understanding from their conversations with the White House. And there's something here that I think can't be overstated. It seems obvious, but it's a really crucial point. Given that Senate Republicans and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell feel completely undercut by what occurred earlier this week, and where House Republicans stand, especially heading into the minority, there is no separation between the president and where Republicans are right now. Republicans have told me repeatedly over the course of the last 24 hours, until the president tells us exactly what he wants, we are not willing to move something to the floor. They are not willing to undercut him. They are not willing to just go on faith or even go on the word of a vice president or an incoming chief of staff or a son-in-law. It will take the president to tell them what he wants in terms of a deal for them to move forward on anything, and that has to some degree caused a state of paralysis as these negotiations go on behind the scenes.
Let's talk more about that, Caitlin, because he mentioned the son-in-law and the Vice President Pence, and even Mick Mulvaney, who has once said that the wall was simplistic. So there's Pence, there's Kushner, they're all working, Mulvaney, all working behind the scenes earlier on Capitol Hill. What is the White House's next move?
They're kind of sitting back and waiting and watching. Now, President Trump shelved his plans to go to Florida today, where he's supposed to be there for a little over 2 weeks or so, and he's still staying here at the White House. And White House officials have said so far they believe he'll stay until a vote happens. Now, right now, they're hopeful something could come together. Of course, they've got to give them 24 hours notice to get back to Washington to vote when they do feel that they have an agreement. So they don't think anything will happen until Sunday or so, but they're waiting to see what's going to happen. And as Phil says, they don't believe they're any closer to a deal right now, so they're kind of just sitting back waiting to see what it is that's going to happen next, because they do very well feel that a shutdown could go on for several days. Now, they feel confident that if it only happens for a few days, they can master that messaging. They can say, this is the president fighting for the border wall, that's why the government is shut down. And they've also got a few days to buy themselves some time, because it's over the weekend, not as many people are at work over the weekend, so you don't see people who have to sit at home that typically would be going into the office. However, if this starts to stretch out into several days, several weeks, going long after the holidays, that's going to be a problem for them because they know that by the minute they are losing leverage because those newly empowered House Democrats are going to take over and things are going to be very different for them. So they're well aware of that. And of course, they're waiting to see what the president is going to say. They sent Pence, Kushner, and Mulvaney up to the Hill today. They came back. They discussed what their conversations were with Schumer, with Ryan, with everyone they spoke with President Trump before leaving tonight. And now it's essentially waiting to see where they go from here.
Yeah.